Wanino Kishkawatuonk. It's really good here to be with everybody. And I'm saying be here with everybody, and I'm in this room, and you all are out there. So I welcome everyone to just to check in the chat and say hello, maybe where you're calling from. I want to begin how I always begin, or I always try to begin. And in some ways, it's to tell you a little bit about myself, but also tell you a bit about the kinds of relationships that matter to me and why I'm here. So I began by greeting you in my language, the Nipmuc language. And I want to acknowledge the lands that I'm calling from. I'm calling in from the lands of the Muskogee Cree and the Cherokee people here outside of Atlanta in Decatur, Georgia. I want to acknowledge the people of this lands, their ancestors and their descendants. And I want to extend my gratitude to them as I also extend my gratitude to my African enslaved and freedmen ancestors, whose love of liberation made possible not just my life, but all the institutions and infrastructures that I and we benefit from. And we owe them a great debt, and for them and their love, I'm grateful. I also want to thank our teachers tonight. I showed up this evening, and the advice, you all know that Lama Rod is my friend, but he's also my teacher too. He said, just show up and hold space and be yourself. So I want to acknowledge and say thank you to Lama Rod and his teachings and his work in the world to make this space happen, to make Bhumisparsha happen. And I want to thank Lama Justin. He's like a Dharma kin to me, and the teacher who I'm just getting to know, just by kind of sitting in a Mahamudra practice and Chud and protector practices in the last year, but I've known him for a few years. We met at HDS when he came to the Black Religion and Spirituality Conference some 5-6 years ago now. But I want to thank him for his teaching and his work that he has done to make the Sangha possible. And I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for coming, for making time to practice, those who are here in time and those who will be here in recorded time. So I guess it's one of the benefits that we have for being virtual in this way. The time doesn't just happen singularly. So, and I also finally want to thank, I particularly want to thank Karen and Aisha, whose talks I've really enjoyed in this space, and who taught me a lot about being on a screen in a space that is both by yourself, but in community. So thank you all for what you shared and for how you've shown us how to be in this space and shown me how to be in this space. So tonight, I wanted to start with a little practice. So many of you all know that I am a Native woman of Nipmuc, and I really have enjoyed the Sunday service, and there are many reasons why I enjoy Sunday service. One of the things that Sunday service is that I love, and it's too in the Medicine Buddha practice that Lama Rod offers, is prayer. And a lot of my prayer is grounded in 2 indigenous traditions, but I'll speak mostly about my prayer in the Native tradition. And a lot of my prayer comes around fire And fire, in many ways, is like the big transformer of many things. You know, it transforms physical matter into ash and smoke. But it also, in some ways, has this real sacred power to take something that's really solid inside of us, like an ask, and bring it up into kind of the universe, you know, that are kind of the bigger relationship, you know, which a lot of times is referred to as the creator, like the bigger force. And so earlier I did offer some smoke as like prayers for this talk to be good, you know, good meaning good from my heart, because my teacher, who is Mayan, a lot of what he taught me was through opening my heart, and in some ways, like allowing my heart to ask what it needs. So I'll offer some smoke to start, and and it's just a way for us to offer something, either that, you know, sometimes we want to lay down, but also just something that um, we want to move, you know. And sometimes it could just literally something we want to offer, we want to share to the world, you know. And and so we'll do that. Um, and that will start us in a sit practice. And so I thought we would sit, and it seems like there are people here who kind of have practice, and I guess if you don't have practice, or you want a different practice, you know, I'm in the midst of helping out with the Love and Rage course. So I've been doing Snow a lot, which is Lama Rod's foundational practice in Love and Rage. Um, but you're invited to practice how you want, including, like, you know, to take a kind of nap. And so I thought we would do that for 15 minutes. And then I'm just going to share a little bit about, you know, what's on my heart tonight. So, yeah, we'll begin. So I'm just going to offer the smoke. And so if there's something you want to offer, and whatever offering looks like for you, it can be a formal prayer or not. Sometimes for me, I'm offering the space for my heart to be open. And so I'll share. I started this little offering for us. This is cedar and some sage and some flowers. And so the crackling you hear is the sage. And so it'll soon turn to smoke. And a lot of times when, you know, I'm in my prayer practice, like, it's just helpful for me to like meditate or to reflect on like what's happening, the change that's happening in the plants, and how they're changing to air because of the fire. And that sometimes can help me like open up, you know, it's kind of like a reminder to be a little more open. So you just take a moment and, you know, decide what you want to offer or ask, or bring into your practice. And we'll do like a 15-minute sit. And then after that time, I'll just talk a little bit about, like I said, what's been on my heart. And when I'm finished, or when it feels like it's, you know, I don't have much to say, hopefully there'll be some questions. And if not, if there are things that you want me to speak to, or that I've said that you want me to clarify, please feel free. So we'll just begin to sit. Thank you, everyone, for practicing with me. Thank you for your practice. And thank you for being here. So, can you hear me? Am I talking too low? I think sometimes, like when I get like real like shy, I can not speak so loud. So if somebody could let me know in the chat if you can hear me, if you need to speak louder, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Today I thought I would talk about Dharma. Thank you, Payne. Thank you, Alex. And by Dharma, I just mean the translation of just like teaching. And I want to talk about the Dharma of trauma. I'm going to try to talk about the Dharma of trauma and what trauma has taught me and what I'm still learning. And then if time allows, I will talk about the Dharma of grace, because I've been thinking about that a lot in my own practice, both my relational practice, my formal practice on and off the cushion, and my healing practice. So this was, well, I guess I should begin in talking about, how I came to learn about Buddhism and just like the practices, like the basic teachings, and what basic teaching really appealed to me. So I was probably about 19, 20. I was at UMass Boston, and I had started meditating with I guess a kind of mentor who became a teacher of mine, who directed the health and wellness center at UMass. And they offered a kind of mindfulness meditation. It was kind of mindfulness, and they called it psychology of mind at the time. But it really used a lot of mindful practices. And him himself, he was trained as a meditation teacher and a social worker, but also as a yogi. He did yoga as well. He would offer that too. And his name was Joel. And I've always been interested in frameworks, and not conceptual frameworks, but how we look at who we are and what we're experiencing to create a kind of freedom, from the ways in which oftentimes the world, and if you're like me, if you're Black and you're female and you're Native and you're queer and the world kind of puts you in these boxes. You need a way to understand you and to not feel so confined. And so my interest in religions, outside of the religion I was born in and I guess attended to. I never say I was raised in it, because I wasn't. It was very optional for me to go to Catholic Mass, and so which meant that I ended up in other types of mostly Christian and Abrahamic places of worship growing up. And it just meant that I had this enthusiasm of really understanding the world beyond just what was given to me, especially spiritually, and just understanding my experience and not seeing it as something that was a box, that I had no agency over, and that I couldn't imagine myself more than what the world, whether it be the religious world or the day-to-day world, was telling me about who I was and how I could be and dream and imagine in the world. So when I was learning how to meditate, I also became very interested in other types of non-Abrahamic, so not just Christian and Jewish and Muslim, but other religions. And my interest was really about how they understood our human condition, and not just our human condition, but like all of the other relations in the world. And although I think personally, I had a way of seeing the world that, I could now call indigenous. I didn't have a lot of language for that. So in some ways, this began the language of seeing outside of the framework of understanding the non-human world, or the world outside of ourselves. And I took early on in my time at UMass a course in East Asian religions. And there I encountered some of the basic teachings of Buddhism. And I always come back to basics, even in like my own practice, like offering fire and smudge when you pray that's a basic native practice, and by basic, I mean, it's just one, it's very foundational. It's very accessible. And although it can be complex and complicated, it's at the foundation of a lot of ways of communicating, with one's lived experience and the experience of other lived entities that support and surround us. And one of the early teachings that still I come back to is kind of the Four Noble Truths. And really, I want to talk about the first one, because it understanding what the Buddha was teaching about suffering really changed how I understood a lot of really violent experiences I had in my life up until that point. And I want to say that, when I talk about these violent experiences, I'm not going to talk about them in detail. And that I also want to acknowledge that having experienced that level of type of violence at an early age, that I too acted those things out. And so I want to also say that too. But the first noble truth, that there is suffering for me, was it was a game changer. It was almost when somebody, it's like when they're like, oh, my mind is blown, or you get like this aha moment, and it just changes everything you thought before and that you will think and that you're thinking now. And I remember, because we were reading the Thich Nhat Hanh. This is like the introduction to Buddhism book, and I just remembered the cover. It's beautiful. I believe it was a Kuan Yin on the front of it, but I'm forgetting the title of the book. But it was it laid out a lot of the foundational teachings, and the Four Noble Truths are one of them. And part of why this truth taught me a lot, and particularly about my trauma, is that it helped me understand that these things that happened, that created a lot of energy or experience that was hard for me then, and took years and still takes years in practice to use Lama Rod's word, to metabolize, to consume, isn't because there was something bad about me. And I think back, and so this is, I guess, where grace comes up. And I think back to my knowing that at a really young age, because when I was young, because for me, a lot of the experiences of violence happened when I was really young. And I remember witnessing it, and I know that I was under the age of 6. And I have this memory of really bearing witness to some physical violence. And I remember looking at the people involved and really knowing that, like, oh, there's not, like, there isn't love here, you know? And there was something about learning about this First Noble Truth that, like, there's suffering that brought me back to that realization that I had as this young girl, like um, watching this violence at the time. It was also like mapping on my body. It's like, what happens, when we bear witness to violence and we can't hold it. But I remember that moment. And in that moment, I look back and it was like I had a moment of understanding that, like, oh, this is like suffering, you know? So in my early 20s, when I'm learning about this, it was like I was able to connect with that like tiny bit of insight, you know? I mean, in some ways, um, that teaching in and of itself, opened up a great deal of possibility, for reimagining, but also re-understanding an experience that really, left an imprint on my life. And I think that that's what like teaching does, like Dharma helps us in some ways. It helps me um, lift the imprint, and kind of reframe what's going on so that I can have a different relationship with it, you know? And in some ways that like I can understand it and have in some ways a different opportunity to like be with it. I think also too about, I can't think about the First Noble Truth without thinking about the second, and that, the cause of the suffering. I mean, because it's good to know, like that young me, like, oh, there's not love here. um, it's also important to know, like, the role we can play sometimes in relating to that love in this way that's I'll call sticky, you know. And there's ways in which when I look back, at the imprints, that the trauma has made, not only has it been places of stuckness in my own experience that I've had to unstick, but I've found that the longer that I hold on to that trauma or that experience, the more attached I get to it. The more I'm defining myself based on that. And recently, this last year, I think all of us have had to really look and see like what matters. And for some of us, it's like, who am I and what matters? And that's in some ways been this journey that I'm on. Am I still all of these really painful things that have happened to me, or am I willing to let that shit go? And I was really thinking about that, in terms of this real deep healing work, that I have to do, like not just individually around the things that have hurt me, you know, and the things that I've done to hurt others, but also the things I need to do to make sure that I'm minimizing pain and violence, I think the challenge of that for me sometimes is, I tend to be really hard on myself. And I guess that's where, another kind of attachment is, I get attached to like how I should be healing or should be practicing or should be um, feeling about how I'm feeling. And I've been, thinking a lot about grace in that, like what how can I give myself grace? A lot of times, Lama Rod talks about like the spaciousness, and I've been thinking about like what how do I extend that to myself, when I'm really constricted, or I'm really, really attached. I'm really, really caught up in my shit. I'm slowly reading this book called Salt Eaters, and I last night came across a passage that kind of speaks to like, I think it speaks better to what I'm talking about. So I'll read the passage and maybe talk a little bit about this real challenge of being like knowing the suffering, but like getting caught up in your suffering, And so Minnie, she's like the medicine woman who's come to help Velma move through some real difficult times that she's having. They're in a mental hospital, and she's going to do some. Minnie's going to do some work for her, and Minnie says, "I can feel, sweetheart, that you're not quite ready to dump the shit." Minnie said. Her next few words drowned out the gasps. The rib nudged against starchy jackets and shuffling the feet. Got to give it all up, the pain, the hurt, the anger, and make room for the lovely things to rush in and to fill you full. Nature abhors a vacuum, don't you know? I was just thinking about like, the ways in which that, I have to be willing to give up the shit, you know? Not just shit from my past or not just the things that happened, but also as things come my way, I have to be willing to give it up, And sometimes I haven't been ready, And I can't say like right now, like I'm fully ready, A few hours ago, I felt really ready, but then it's like, I feel like I like accumulate the shit, And I guess that's what attachment is like for me, that I'm attached to the story that I have about, like what happened to me when, and these are real things. I'm not saying that they aren't, I know, maybe that's another share, but I have to really think about that because, it really does implicate people who I still love, despite what has happened to us in our past. I do love them, and I haven't yet figured out how to share in a way that doesn't implicate people as just awful people, They might have done some really awful things, but they're not awful people. A friend of mine who does a lot of recovery work, on behalf of herself and her family, says, they're still in my heart, but they ain't in my home. And so I'm working on like the language around that. And so until then, I can't talk in detail about like what it is I know in terms of having experienced a lot of real trauma, and some of us are experiencing that now, and so that is real. And I do think that when I think about just kind of the basic teachings, around especially the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. I guess in some ways for me, it gives me the opportunity and the agency to practice letting that shit go. And I have to want to do it. And then I have to want to continue to do it. Like choose that each time, and that's the practice, and that's the work. I think what makes that work less like hard and heavy is grace. So I think that I think this is why I'll talk a little bit about grace in relation to the Dharma of trauma, right? And how the Dharma of grace, I think, allows us, to extend some space. My teacher Juan had sent me today the 2015 recording of President Obama singing at Reverend Pinckney's funeral. He was the Reverend of the Emmanuel AME Church that had someone come in and assassinate several of the members, including him, in 2015. And during the eulogy, President Obama began to sing one of my favorite songs. Growing up in my family, this is something that was sung, I think, at all the funerals that I went to. And in my mother's family, that was a lot, because she comes from a pretty big family. And it was Amazing Grace. And if you don't know the words of the song, I don't think I'm going to sing it. Do I have it in me to sing it? Let's see. I might. Let's see. But it goes, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. I had to like rearrange it because there was I was going a little too high. But yeah, grace, this idea, or this, in some ways for me, grace is like the experience of like making a larger space for me to be, with something that's really, really difficult, And pain is difficult. Pain is more difficult when we don't allow ourselves to experience it so it can go. I know for me, it has been a lot of grace, not just for myself, but from people who love me, my friends, my teachers, my community members, that has given me that space, to move through things that are really, really difficult and not to make the suffering worse, the trauma worse, and to not have it stay, because that's not the point. The point is for it to keep moving, for the experience to keep moving. I mean, we have these bodies. I mean, we were just, with the fire, I mean, one thing I love about holding fire is that, like, it teaches me so much about how things change. The things that are burning will become ash, and that ash will become smoke, and that smoke will be in the air, and it's all changing, you know. Um, and in some ways, grace allows me that opportunity to relax, and to see, like the song says, I was blind, but now I see, you know. I think that when we can open our heart and see, from and with our heart, in the same way, my teacher always tells me, like, pray from your heart. It's why I don't have a lot of words when I pray, because it's like I've been taught to pray from my heart, that's when things change. But like the excerpt reminds us, you have to be ready to let that shit go, and that when you let it go, you have to know, also be ready to be filled with something good. Because that's the other thing that I was, back to what I became attached to, attached to, like, thinking all I am is my trauma. All I am are these bad things that have happened. All I am is this loss or this lack, become really identified. We fill ourselves up with that, And it's not to say that a lot of bad things don't happen, because they do. And it changes. And I think if we allow grace in for that change, that we could see it, that we could see that it's always changing, And so I'm deeply grateful, for that, the framing of the noble truths to help me see, like, this isn't about me, this is not because I'm a bad person, because I deserve this. It's the way the world has to be, I mean, in some ways, for, the first two noble truths really have helped me reframe and imagine what could be possible. That's good, not just for me, but for all of us, you know. I think I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or Let's see who's out there. Yes, amen. Welcome. So no questions or comments? Okay, well, we could do some more practice if people want to do that. I don't know that I have anything else to say. So people like to practice more, or what are people feeling? That's pain for a heart for practice, I assume. Enjoying the silence. Yeah, I love the silence too. Thank you, Karen. How about deep? Thank you. Oh, thank you. You're welcome, Laura. Well, why don't we practice a little bit? Like, let's say for like maybe 10 minutes. And then I'll come back and, yeah, maybe have a little bit more to say. So, thanks, Pain. A heart for your heart and shining bright. Thank you. Um, all right. So we'll just we'll sit for a little bit, or just have some silence. Thank you all for practicing with me. And thank you for your practice. Something also kind of came up for me, around the second noble truth about the cause of suffering, like being able to understand that like suffering has a root, I think has also been really important to me in my healing. When I think back to you know that little person, seeing that that violence play out, in some ways, as I got older, I of course became to know more about their story, the people who were, engaged in the violent behavior. I got to know more about their story, and then understood that, like, that they were acting out, in a lot of ways, a lot of unprocessed and undealt with pain, you know. Um, and were doing what they best knew how to do with that. And it caused a lot of harm. And I think it also taught me something about what happens when we don't tend to our pain, when we get really caught up in it, you know. We can be, as Lama Rod writes, like we could be somebody else's work, you know. And so it was, that took years and years of work and work I still feel like I'm still doing, to unwind that root system, um, of trauma, and so in many ways, like, the ability for me to really, and I don't mean look in this way, but I think in the way of the song "Amazing Grace," like that we're blind. It's not that it's not our seeing eyes. It's like our heart is blind, or because it's broken. And sometimes, like, when we're in pain, when I'm in pain, I can just like shut it down. But if I can keep it open enough to see that there are roots here, and as the next noble truth reminds us, like, there is an end, there is an end to this suffering. Like, there's a way that I can be in relationship to this that is very different, that can allow me to see, So I guess in some ways, like, what my trauma has taught me is a lot about grace, and as the song says, how amazing that grace is. How amazing it is for me to see what something is, and to have the ability to then make decisions about it, It's hard for me to make decisions about something that is causing me pain, or that brings pain unto me, and to be shut down. But when I can see it, it makes all the difference. Makes all the difference. There's a question. Thank you for offering the space and teaching. Okay. Mhm. Yeah, the practice of letting go. Mhm. Yep. Oh, what happened? Oh, okay, it became answered. Oh, it's back on top. Sorry, I'm a little slow to read. So yeah, so the question is about, thank you, is about letting go. Casil, thank you for your question. Yeah, the practice of letting go. Well, one thing I have to say for me is that it's a practice. And yeah, I think that, I'm quoting Lama Rod a lot because I'm also like in the course with everybody. So, he talks about it in terms of something we do over and over again. And I think sometimes, especially if the fear is losing ourselves, we think that it's like cycle, but I like it's just like a never ending like circle, but it's kind of like a cycle. Like if you can imagine it like a tree, right? Like I really learn a lot from the seasons, and call it being a northeastern Nipmuc woman all my life. But trees have taught me a lot, especially trees. If you're in a climate where trees turn colors in fall, they've taught me a lot about letting go. You know, um, other butterflies also, caterpillars to butterflies, teach me a lot about letting go as well. But I'll just stick with the tree metaphor. Um, I don't think a leaf is worried about being less of a tree when it lets go. In fact, um, when I've watched the fall come, and I'm talking about the fall of specifically in New England, but I could even speak to the fall here in Georgia because there are trees that change colors and the leaves go. In some ways, it I'll go back to the fire. It's the biggest offering to return back to where it comes, to change and to offer itself to the ground to which will help continue to nourish the roots. I think that, for me, this is where, my worldview, which is, pretty mostly influenced by indigeneity, but not completely, um, helps me in the letting go. Um, I guess the other thing that helps me too is that, like, fear to me is like a contraction. So, it's hard for me to let go. Like if you have like your hand, like, I'll just put a pen in my hand. Like it's hard for me to like let anything go if I'm contracted. So when the first thing I have to do, and like this is like the grace piece, is like I also have to relax. I think there's a piece of faith, I think, in letting go as well. And that is that whatever I'm letting go of, I don't need. And this back to, the excerpt that I read, like, it's like I'm holding on to shit that I don't need. I'm holding on to pain. And I think sometimes, for me, when I'm afraid of letting go, I think that I am the pain, I am the suffering. And sometimes I even think that that's all I deserve. I mean, to talk about like getting like really attached. Um, but the fear is real. It's how we relate to it, that I think can help in the letting go. I'm just gonna look back at the question to make sure I spoke to all of the pieces even. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so this is the practice piece about the letting go too. Like I know sometimes I can just let it all go. Most of the times it's a little bit of the time, and it's like contract. It's like I'm like this, like okay, okay, and then and then there's really nothing to hold on to, because sometimes sometimes we're also holding on to a story about who we were or who we ought to be, and again, it's that story, and then there's nothing there. I'll tell this quick story. So when I was 19, no, well, yeah, yeah, 19, 20, yeah, 2021, yeah, 19, 20, 21. I went to UMass for a semester, and then for the second part of my 19th year, for when I was 20 to 21, I was dealing with acute anxiety and agoraphobia, which meant that I didn't leave my house for about 2 years. And, I had a place that I felt comfortable, like a mile radius, but for the most part, I had stayed home because I was afraid of these panic attacks that I was experiencing, and I didn't know what to do. And during that time, I'd done a lot of research about panic and anxiety, and also about trauma, and I was reading a lot about women who had trauma histories, sexual and physical trauma histories, having moved through anxiety or agoraphobia. And there was this particular type of therapy called exposure therapy. I started researching that. And about a year and a half into that time in my life, the David Barlow Center for Anxiety and Related Disorder had moved to BU. And I went there for an intake, and they asked me, if I'd be willing to share my story with 2020, and I did. And so I guess if you're really good on the internet, you can find this video. But what was one of the things that the therapist who I was working with at the time had really said to me that was really life-changing to me, about related to this letting go and our capacity to do something different with our suffering, was towards the end of this week-long intensive exposure therapy. And they were exposing me to every single thing that I had really, because of the anxiety and agoraphobia, had walked away from in my life and shut down from. And I was taking a trip. I was going to go on a Greyhound and go to, I think, I was going to Rhode Island, not Connecticut, Rhode Island. And she was, saying goodbye to me. And I said, I just can't believe it. I can't believe I was able to do all this work and move through all these really difficult feelings and sensations and fears. And she said, Sadada, it was you were like Dorothy, you always had the capacity to do it, so you just had to remember, and there was something really powerful to me, because it allowed me to let go of this way in which, especially for these 2 years, I was so identified with being somebody who was so limited and paralyzed, by the anxiety and by the agoraphobia. And that image that she left me with, which is when she was like, you've always had the ruby slippers, it's like, oh, wow. When I could look down and see and know how resourced I am beyond this really difficult experience. And of course, a lot of that was made possible by support. And so that's why Sangha and relationships are really important. It wasn't like, oh, I looked down and then I could do it, I needed support, I needed practice, but in the end, it was I had to do it, and then I have to remember. So I hope that was helpful. And I hope that answered your question. Thank you for your question. We have time maybe for one more question if folks want to ask another question. Let's do Lama sharing here. This is great. Well, if there are no more questions, I'll dedicate the merit of tonight, and then we'll end. So I would like to dedicate the merit of this practice for all beings and all of our relations, the earth relations, the rocks, the rivers, the oceans, the humans, the two-legged, the four-legged creatures, the creepy crawlers, all of our relations. May they be free from the causes and conditions of suffering. May they experience love and care and joy. Oh. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Payne. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Please check out our calendar. There are a lot of wonderful things happening. I think tomorrow night is protective practice, and there's just a lot of wonderful things happening in Bhumisparsha. Yeah. Alex, if there's anything you want to post or let me know. It's been a while since I've been on Crowdcast. Oh, next week Lama Rod will be back for the community share. Yay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Kitabadamish. We say I thank you. And have a good night and a good practice.